This week on the Eldritch Lorecast,
Lairs of Etharis is now available on D&D Beyond.
it's really exciting.
Well, look at that.
Wait.
How to describe the look of your world, especially when your players aren't familiar with fantasy touchstones.
Shawn, you said you have to use a light touch with sensory description. How would you try to quantify the lightness of that touch?
Why no dragons in Grim Hollow?
This is a good question, Benjamin.
Barry left this question on Spotify, because you can leave comments on Spotify.
Yes, Barry. All that and more right now. Good.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 tabletop RPG and 5e podcast and other things podcast, VTT podcast in all the realms. I'm extremely excited for this week. We have pre-recorded it, so save your questions until next week.
It's a different week, a different day.
That was Dael Kingsmill jumping in ahead of myself, Ben Byrne, James Hake, Shawn Merwin. James, I've got a question for you. Know what? Actually, Dael, see, you're eager. You're
you
eager
started
to go.
with me last week, so
and people need to appreciate this hat. If you, what is? Sorry, I'm distracted by the hat. What is one of your favorite monster lairs specifically that you have featured in one of your games? Maybe you pulled it from a book or designed it yourself, but talking about the lair itself.
Ooh. I ran a Christmas one-shot. This is a good question, Benjamin.
Thank you.
I ran a Christmas one-shot for my friends at some point that was inspired by Tolkien's Father Christmas letters and the goblins therein. And I just made this whole kind of cave, this ice cave system full of sort of hive-style goblins who had scrawled all across all of the walls, naughty, nice, naughty, 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 nice, naughty, and just kind of made it a little bit creepy. That was a lot of fun. I did a lot of playing with dark vision can't see in color, and they'd written stuff in red. So when they did cast a fireball or whatever, it lit up the walls and you could see the messaging. That was really fun. That's maybe that might be up there.
In Critical Role Call of the Netherdeep, the final dungeon of that story is the Netherdeep, and it's kind of the twisted, semi-real, semi-psychological lair of the godling that is imprisoned within it. And so all of the rooms within it are kind of twisted by visions of regret and sorrow and the struggles that this being went through in life. And so there's a very sort of I don't know how to describe it. There's a sort of dreamlike unreality to it that I really enjoy. Rooms that have, where metaphor is made literal, like where, this demigod was once a person who kind of gave all he had to give to the people and asking nothing in return. And so part of his damage is that, he has come to resent that, and you can kind of show him how to believe in his old faith again. And so there are rooms in where there, thousands of hands are growing from the walls and kind of grasping at your cloak and at your boots, trying to like drag you into the things they need, the things that you can give to them.
Yeah, that reminds me, because whenever I ask these questions, often I can't think, like if I get asked a question, I'll have a great answer that I just can't think of. And that reminds me of one of my favorite lairs that I was scratching my brain. I was like, I love lairs. Surely I've done a really great lair. And it was a citadel called the Citadel. I was very creative. But basically a mage had been slain there in some magical confluence that had caused everybody to leave and it to become an abandoned tower. But the mage's consciousness was kind of infused into the tower. He wasn't a ghost. I actually used an elder brain stat block for him at the end. So he had kind of become the tower. And so exploring it was like wandering through their memories and putting clues together. And because he'd been there for 1,000 years, you kind of learned the deep history of the realm while exploring this citadel through his memories. And then at the same time, there were mind flayers invading it. So they kind of had their own impacts on like changing things and him trying to shift the players around to different rooms to keep them safe from the mind flayers. It was a great time. It's a good dungeon. Shawn Merwin, you've designed plenty of dungeons, plenty of lairs, I should say, some of them for Lairs of Etharis. But what is it doesn't have to be from that book, but what is a favorite lair that you've used in game or designed?
I'm going to go in two different directions, if you permit. I'm going to talk first about one of the first books that Wizards of the Coast published for 4th edition was called Dungeon Delve. And it was a book of 30 layers, one for each level, since 4th edition went from level 1 to 30. And they tapped a few organized playwriters to create these delves, these layers. And so I think I worked on 6 of them, maybe. A bunch of us worked on like 4 to 6 each. But I got to do the first level one, which was quite the honor. And I did Copper Knight Hold, which was a dwarven hold that was supposed to be delivering goods to town, but they didn't make their delivery. So the adventurers trundle off at first level to find out what happens. And it's a typical kobolds have invaded. They've taken over with the help of a dragon, a baby dragon, but a dragon. And so it was the first time that a lot of players were using these rules. So I tried to make it fun with lots of traps because they're kobolds, so you're going to have lots of traps. But then there's that big surprise of you fought your way through a few rooms with kobolds, you come around the corner, and there's a dragon that's getting ready to breathe on you, which was a lot of fun. And it was cool, and it got used a lot. But someone sent me a link once and said, check this out. And I had no idea what it was. I clicked on it. It wasn't a URL I recognized.
Don't do that.
It was Will Wheaton.
Danger.
It was Will Wheaton's blog. And he was writing about running D&D for the first time for his children. And that's the adventure he was running for them. And it was the first time where I'd done a lot of organized playwriting, so I knew people were playing my stuff. But this was the first time I was like, ooh, yeah.
People are playing your stuff.
Playing this stuff. And the most challenging recently was from Lairs of Etharis, because I wrote the last 5, which covers levels 16 to 20. And trying to create anything at that level is hard. Trying to create a layer at that level is even harder, because for high level things, you design a certain way. Maybe at some point we'll talk about high level game design and making adventures fun at high level. But it made it harder to do a short thing and a contained thing at that level. But I hope that along with Tom Donovan, who wrote the first 10 layers, and Greg Marks, who wrote the next 5 layers, that we put together a book of layers that are both fun to play in their own right, but also emblematic of Etharis.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've been reading through it a lot recently for reasons that are about to become obvious, and I think it's really great. You know, the monsters in there, the lairs in there are really fantastic. And speaking of Lairs of Etharis, it's going to be easier than ever for folks to be able to play through those lairs if they want, because Lairs of Etharis is now available at time that you're hearing this on D&D Beyond. It has just landed as of last week, just before PAX Unplugged. And you can go get it right now for $14.99 US and play through all of those lairs. There's 20 lairs from levels 1 all the way to 20. There's over 75 Grim Hollow stat blocks, which are now fully integrated into D&D Beyond. There are 2 feats for the crafting system that you can add to your character sheet. There are new magic items and new spells that you can grab from Lairs of Etharis. Once we started porting it in, we were like, oh, there's actually quite a lot of like ancillary stuff here outside of like the adventure itself. But I cannot express how much I've been sitting on this news and trying not to tell it.
It's really exciting.
It's extremely exciting. Anyway, yeah. Now I feel like a rush of energy just kind of draining me at the moment as I finally am able to talk about this in this very secretly pre-recorded episode of the Eldritch Lorecast.
This is so cool. So are all of these layers, they're not just on D&D Beyond, but are they on the maps thing too? I legitimately don't know. I'm learning about this right now.
Yeah, no, I deliberately kept this a secret to get Dael and James's legitimate reaction to this. I put this in our run sheet.
So it is on maps?
It is on maps. Yes, it is. Absolutely. It looks fantastic on maps. And not only have they imported the monster art from Lairs of Etharis as tokens to go onto maps when you pull in those monsters, but they've also incorporated some of our character art as well to like that you can add to your character sheet. I assume to be able to add it.
Well, look at that.
You can also pull in other monsters from D&D Beyond, because there are basic rules monsters in some of these lairs as well that you can pull in and add them when you need those tokens. And you can pull in those monsters into any kind of, function that if you're running not in Lairs, if you're running your own game, your homebrew, or in another adventure, you can port in those monsters by checking the Grim Hollow content box.
And these are Monster Grimoire monsters.
These are Monster Grimoire, over 75 monsters from the Monster Grimoire, including the Fazeg, including the Angel of Imperius, including the Malakirian Imp, including the Shattercorpse.
Get your Grim Fantasy! Get your Grim Fantasy
The
here!
Harvester of Lies, the Bone Trader, the salvage mechanics.
Great.
The salvage mechanics have gone in there as well.
Wait,
So,
wait.
So every Grim Hollow monster comes with salvage that might be like, all right, I'm going to build, longtime Lorecast listeners might know some of this already, but I'm talking about it in reference to D&D Beyond. So I might, build plate mail from the hide of an Empyrean brazen bull, which is like this golden celestial bull. And it's plate mail that gives you fire and radiance resistance, as well as like +1 plate mail. Or I might make oil of sharpness from the candle wax of a candlelight demon and rub that on my blade. I'm sorry, Shawn, I'm taking all the talking points here because you actually wrote this, but I'm just so excited. I can't shut up.
I know nothing more about this, but I have to say, when inevitably the Monster Grimoire shows up on D&D Beyond, very good. They've done some of the work already.
yeah, exactly.
I'm fingers crossed that happens, because even having a fraction of it is so cool.
I don't know if this is even like a thing, or if it's possible, or if it's something that Grim Hollow wants to do, or if it's something that, I don't know nothing about this, but I'm now daydreaming about the day I don't have to like force one of the Grim Hollow classes or subclasses into D&D Beyond's homebrew thing. That would be incredible.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of sort of ancillary questions.
Let me play a Pride Monk!
Just put it in there. Yeah, that's all stuff we would love to do. No announcement outside of Lairs except that, separate to Grim Hollow, Dungeons of Drakkenheim is also now pre-orderable.
Very nice.
At time of recording for D&D Beyond. So that's releasing, I think, a little bit later in December, but you can go to D&D Beyond at time of listening to this and pre-order Dungeons of Drakkenheim from the Dungeon Dudes as well. Published by Ghostfire Gaming.
Very nice.
By Monty and Kelly.
Well, grats, Ghostfire Gaming. Yeah. That's very exciting.
Hell yeah.
Thank you. Shawn, do you have anything? Did I just word vomit the whole thing out? Do you? This is your product, really. You were in charge of Lairs of Etharis and the Monster Grimoire.
Yeah, no, it's exciting. I didn't even know all the details. I knew something was going on, but other than answering a few questions about, hey, in Lairs, this says this. Is this right? That sort of thing. I wasn't aware of everything that was happening, so I am so excited it's always exciting to get your work in front of more people, and being on D&D Beyond is very exciting. So I can sit here and state some obvious things like I just did, but I hope people just enjoy the heck out of the things that we create. Thank you to Ghostfire for publishing all of this great stuff. Thank you to D&D Beyond for being the host of it. And hopefully more will come, not just from us, but from everybody in the community who works so hard at this hobby. Also,
mad props to the team who will have done all of the translating, whatever the actual word is for taking a book thing,
ingesting,
and making it the D&D Beyond thing, because that's not a small amount of work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, the team at D&D Beyond have been really fun to work with and really great. And a lot of them, every time we talk to them, are legitimate fans of either Grim Hollow or Dungeons of Drakkenheim or both. And so it's been fun, talking with them, and they'll ask a question, whether it's about something technical or whether it's about, theme or aesthetic, or, we had a hand in how this is going to be marketed around PAX Unplugged as well, or just beforehand. And just answering those questions and having them go, my favorite is talking about the Shattercorpse, which is like a zombie that has glass kind of like growing out of it because it died by getting thrown through a window or something like that. It's kind of like a Bloody Mary. Yeah, exactly. And it just feels like it's a great encapsulation of the horror themes that and the kind of body horror that Grimhollow can tap into for people who want to try those more horror themed monsters.
Yeah, and I can't wait to tell the 40 plus people who worked on the grimoire. The Lairs are, 3 of us, but the grimoire, there were 40 plus people who contributed monsters and ideas and development, and including some of my first students got to submit some monsters. So I can't wait to see which monsters. I have an idea of which monsters are going up based on the Lairs, but they're going to be tickled pink. By the way, you now have something up on D&D Beyond. Congratulations.
This just makes me so happy, dude.
Shawn, if you point directly upwards, there'll be a link right there, straight to D&D Beyond. If you want to grab Lairs of Etharis, it's available right now. There'll be a link down in the description as well. I'll probably throw a pre-order link to Dungeons of Drakkenheim. Go check out the Dungeon Dudes channel. They'll be talking about it over there, how excited they are for it. We're extremely excited as well. I don't want to speak on their behalf. That really is their baby, Dungeons of Drakkenheim. But I've gone on record on this podcast before saying that is an amazing adventure that I definitely want to run one day. So if you want to have your player characters, port straight into Dungeons of Drakkenheim or Lairs of Etharis, there it is. It's a great gateway into Grimhollow, more broadly speaking, for people who want to try more of the dark fantasy, moral complexity of the setting. If you want to make your players cry like I do, check out Grimhollow.
Or laugh.
Lairs of Etharis.
Or laugh. Or embrace.
Yeah.
They laugh. They definitely laugh at my expense more often than not. No, I'm just kidding. Go check it out. Blah, blah, blah. I don't know if there's much more to say about it. Blah, 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 blah. Because we're recording this in advance, if stuff happened at PAX Unplugged, I'm not going to know about it. So hopefully not too much. That'll have to wait till next week. Sorry, I paused because Dael looked like you wanted to say something, but
and then I thought better of it because it was just a stupid comment. It was just one of my patented stupid remarks.
Well, now you have to share with the rest of the class.
It wasn't even good, Ben. I was just going to say, so no one do anything at PAX Unplugged. No one go. Everyone stay home.
Well, that's definitely not the plan. Try to keep the news to a minimum, I suppose. Otherwise, it'll have to wait till next week, as is typical.
No Magic the Gathering heists, okay?
That never happens.
I mean, to be fair, the Lairs news, the D&D Beyond news will be old hat by the time people hear this. So, I just would take the moment to expunge our excitement. Is that the right word? Expunge? No, I'm going to stop trying, Dael. I'm going to continue. Expound? I don't know. Anyway. Speaking of expunging things, Shuart has a question. James, where would Shuart have emailed their question?
He would have emailed us at... Oh no, I forgot it. What is it at ghostfiregaming.com? Podcast at ghostfiregaming.com?
It is indeed podcast at ghostfiregaming.com. I don't blame you.
Dante, ignore that.
James, where would Shuart have emailed their question?
Well, of course he would have emailed us at podcast at ghostfiregaming.com.
Whoa, got it in one.
And their question was asking about how to describe the look of your world, especially when your players aren't familiar with fantasy touchstones. And my little kind of edit onto that, because this is a genuine question I have, is how long do you spend describing your world or describing scenes? Shuart was saying, I believe, if I'm remembering their email correctly, that their friends don't have a lot of touchstones like Game of Thrones or The Witcher or Skyrim that they're more engaged with. And so he can't just be like, that castle in Game of Thrones, because they'll be like, no. How do you go about descriptions if you don't have those kind of things to rely on?
The place I always go to for inspiration is nature. I'm very fortunate to live in a very beautiful part of the country up here in the Pacific Northwest, where I can just kind of go out on hikes in the mountains and the forests and by rivers and against the ocean and have that be very normal. And so whenever I think of things like that, things described in a fantasy world, I go out and I try and find something that's roughly equivalent in the real world, or even just, go on Google Images or something like that, and look at photos of national parks or European historic monuments or things like that, and be like, okay, well, what would I do? How could I break this down into real sensory detail? Because sensory detail is the way to go with it. Sight is fine. Being able to say that, and there is one tower that looms high into the sky, right? There's one thing that you can grab onto geometrically almost. That's good. But, if you can describe the taste of the air, or the scent of the soil, or the roughness of a tree's bark, the stickiness of its sap, I mean, that will lodge an image in your players' heads.
I can't add too much to that because the internet is such a useful tool that I am not a visually oriented person. So when I'm writing something, I do exactly what James said. It's go for the senses. Just a touch. If you overdo it, you're going to lose people a lot. So just lightly layer in, what does something look like, smell like, feel like. But books that you will buy from Wizards of the Coast and Ghostfire Gaming and any other publisher spend reams and reams of money on artists doing art. So just go to those books and flip through them. You don't even have to read the words. You can just, this forest here, this is what my world is close enough to look like, or this building, or these people, or whomever, or whatever you're trying to describe. They might not be familiar with fantasy, but you are probably. If you are running a Witcher game, you probably have access to Witcher books, Witcher art, Witcher magazines, Witcher whatever. The TV show, you will be able to find things online to hold up in front of your players, which I do constantly when I'm running. I'm running Unseen Sun right now, and I'm constantly holding the book up or the screen up to show people what everything looks like that I'm describing.
Yeah.
Shawn, you said you have to use a light touch with sensory description. How would you try to quantify the lightness of that touch, the subtlety of it?
What is the most important thing that someone should know? What word? Words have meanings. Words are important. So if I want someone to know that this person is rough and physical, and I'm going to find the word that means that, and I'm going to make sure that that word not only describes that person, but it puts the players in a frame of mind where they know what they are supposed to be getting with interactions with that person, as sort of a clue. So all my box text, I try to make almost poetry, not in the sense of that it is poetic, but poetry in the sense that every word should have a use, and not just one use. It should have multiple uses. If I'm describing a statue, I am describing not necessarily how big it is or what it's made of, if that's not important. But what I'm going to describe are the fiery gems in its eyes. A, because that's where the trap is. B, because that's where the treasure is. So I'm making sure that I point that out. So I can just say the large statue. If it's important that it's granite, I will put that below the box text for the dungeon master. But in the read aloud text, only put in the words that are going to be triggering something in the player, and hopefully more than one thing in the player.
Because it's all the associations that come with a given synonym as well, right? Like the English language, certainly, I'm sure every other language, I just don't speak any of them, have all manner of words that mean the same thing, but they evoke different feelings. It's the difference between stomach and tummy, or feelings or emotion. They are the same thing. They make you feel a different way. And you can really hack into that as a tool for hacking into your players' reactions to certain things. You can make, Ben and I are so snappy today. We're like, yes. But Shawn mentioned box text. I can't trust myself with descriptions at all. I tend to do things in the wrong direction, where I will describe a lot in a situation that doesn't matter, like travel, but I will forget to describe a room that they're about to do combat in, or that they're about to investigate. So I often write boxed text for myself. which I find is good because I can also control how long I'm going to be talking for and try to not lose my players. But also the art, talking about art, it's so helpful, particularly for players. If your go-to description visually for something is, in Lord of the Rings when, and your players can't connect with that. Those are things that we often are associating with a visual thing as well, right? Like you're probably associating with the visuals of the films of Lord of the Rings more than you are the text from the books, because otherwise you could just read the text from the books and they would be like, oh yeah, trees. But so we've got that real like implanted image in our brains, and you can just show them that image and it makes a world of difference, to the point where for such a long time I have wished just so often that there was a product. You know how we get books that you can buy that are just full of battle maps that you can put down on the table and use? I have players who are slightly more geared towards theater of the mind than they are to battle maps. They kind of check out as soon as there's a tactical map in front of them. And so I keep wishing that there was a book of just kind of like the concept art for video games, where you can tell it's been designed by someone who is thinking about it as terrain to play on, where they're like, yes, and there are these levels, and to get to these levels, you have these two parts, that sort of thinking. But that kind of evocative imagery that you could just hold up to your player and say, this is where we are. And now we enter combat. I would love for something like that. So people out there.
Yeah. I used to pull that in when I was playing online, especially, and like sharing screen and whatnot. I would always have my share screen up, even if we weren't in combat. And if it wasn't showing a map or something, what it would show is usually like a mood piece of art that I got probably off Pinterest or something that was meant to be a visual representation of the place where they are to set that mood. If it's a rainforest, I'd find like, an image where the camera's tilted upwards towards the mist that kind of hangs among the tree branches. Or if it was a city town, I'd find some concept art of a village and where people were walking around. I was very specific, because if there were, species within that village that in that piece of art that didn't belong in the world, I wouldn't use that one. I'd use a different one. So you can get specific about it. But creating Pinterest mood boards are a really great way to ingest, I suppose, more inspiration for descriptions and things like that. Reading, speaking of the Dungeon Dudes, I remember on one of our very first episodes, Kelly McLaughlin talked about how just growing your vocabulary through reading can really help with descriptions. And I also write down descriptions for rooms before the players go in there. I usually try to do mine in dot points so that I can go off book and look at the players and not feel like I'm kind of reading from a box. So I don't like box text, is because if I look away, I can't find my place again. Whereas if it's in dot points, I can...
Exactly the conversation I had every time there was a presentation at uni, and people would be like, do it in dot points so you can just, drop in and out of what you've got written. But I just...
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, everybody's going to
That's
have
how
their
I do
own
everything. I write it out in full and then I go off script anyway. But the dot points are helpful.
To go back to an earlier point about reference art, to hype up another VTT, Alchemy Tabletop specifically does that. When you haven't got a battle map prepared, they link, I don't know, a establishing shot with all of their battle maps that are published through.
That's a great word for it. Establishing shot. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
When we talk about cinematic RPGs, that's the sort of presentational elements we're talking about. But yeah, I think it's especially ones that are done by Chepeku, the map makers. They kind of pair, when they do stuff for Alchemy, they pair an establishing shot illustration with an associated battle map.
There's an interesting site called Describe. When I first joined Ghostfire, I was approached by the person who started this to ask if I would write for them. And what they do is they write scenes that you can then use to read. If you're entering the frosty forest, you can just grab this bit of text and read it. And I thought this was a really interesting thing, because we get a lot of art, but we don't get a lot of this sort of text. And they've expanded to do spells. What does a spell look like when you cast it? Well, here's a description. Nice. But they also do sounds. They do have some for free, but it's like a subscription database sort of service. And it's DSCRYB, Describe. If you check it out online, I don't know much
because
about
it's
it
for fantasy.
Yes. So if you're interested in something like that, that's always there to check out too. I know they do maps as well, I think.
Yeah, no, that sounds cool. I mean, spells is something that I love giving evocative descriptions to.
Mhm.
I never cast a spell by just saying, I cast Fireball. Everybody has to wait. Well, I spend 10 minutes. No, I'm just kidding. But sometimes I do get kind of, that's where I get brain stuck a little bit, is on describing spells for some reason. Hopefully that answers the question. Speaking of questions, Barry also sent a question to podcast@ghostfiregaming.com asking, actually, no, Barry did not. Barry left this question on Spotify, because you can leave comments on Spotify.
Yes, Barry.
So Barry asking the question, how do you keep a group playing together after folk move to different cities or places? And then my slight editorializing on this being how to keep a campaign regular, especially when folks' lives are changing. My group, we haven't moved to different cities. We're still in the same city, though we have moved to kind of different corners of that city. One of us has had, some of us are having children. Some of us are really busy with our jobs where we're flying more, like different things like that are happening. So how do you maintain a campaign through life's changes if you've been able to maintain it so far?
I would say the biggest thing for me, so I do have players who decided to all disappear to the different four corners of the earth. And the biggest lesson that I learned amongst that is if you want to keep playing with that group, you're going to have to either commit to only doing it in person when they visit, or commit to changing to playing online. Because I did try for a little while, okay, the people who are still living here, let's continue meeting in person because I prefer playing in person. And the other players who'd moved away called in, and I think they just had a miserable time because they can't, there are going to be technical issues. They can't see the map. They don't know what's going on. They can't hear you properly. And eventually it's just going to be them sitting there for a few hours while you play D&D far away from them. So I would say commit to one or the other, because as much as we can all believe in the dream of mixed media D&D, it's not that simple.
I find it's getting better. I would have agreed with you, particularly during COVID, not to evoke that spectre, but I really struggled with the mixed meeting until I kind of got better and better with the tools used for mixed meetings. I once did a game where I had the people I was playing with had podcast quality microphones, and they had camera pointed at the table. Obviously not everybody's going to have this tech, but it's just a funny story. And then I had the one guy who was not there was projected on a TV screen that was behind me like the Emperor. And so when I'm talking, I would turn around and look at him, but he's like, you're not looking at me. I can't see. And I was like, oh, right, the camera's in front of me. I agree. I think for long-term campaigns, and I don't enjoy playing when everybody else is together and I'm isolated. I tend to disengage and tune out. So for long-form campaigns, I agree. But generally what I do is I have a spare one of these that I own, a podcast microphone. I set that up near the GM. It's usually good enough that I can pick everyone up. And then I get a Zoom call happening on 2 separate laptops. So that one is close to the GM so that I can interface with them directly. And one
so
is
the real answer
group.
Is commit to whatever you're committing to.
Well, look, I mean, this is
if you have the commitment and the equipment necessary to commit to mixed media, then go for it.
Yeah, I guess it's just it's not impossible, but I don't want to make people feel
you're
like
right
they
that
can't.
the tech is getting better and better and better. But yeah.
The question I would ask is, did your group get together to play D&D, or did your group get together to get together? If your group got together and D&D was the excuse to get together, then you might want to realize that, and it might be easier just to have a Zoom call and hang out. That might actually meet the requirements of what you were trying to do, because if you do want a really solid game, you almost have to do what Ben does. Do you have the fortitude? Do you have the technology to do what Ben does? Because that's what you're going to need to do to make sure everybody is heard, everybody is seen, everybody feels like they're a part of the game.
I think that, in terms of maintaining a long-form campaign as well, and this advice, your mileage will probably vary. But the thing that I've learned, even in under the best circumstances, is to not think of your D&D game as like the special night where we all get together, as like the, let's get together for a games night, but just to think of it as part of your routine, and that you will show up, hell or high water within reason. And that's the way to maintain that consistency and commitment, as opposed to thinking of it as a special occasion. It's just part of your routine. You want to do it every week. It's somewhere where you go every Thursday night or Friday or Tuesday or whatever it is. Whether it's monthly or weekly or bi-weekly, and just being committed to that, and not kind of blowing it off because you're like, long day at work or, this or that, because you have party members, if this person's had a hard day and then the next week this person's had a hard day, and then that can cause the group to just kind of go defunct over time. Again, I mean that all within reason. I don't mean to be like, if you've broken your leg, you drag yourself to that game. But I just find that having that firm level of commitment is what is required to get it to be regular.
Yeah, and I think that ties in a lot with what Shawn was saying as well, is that sometimes you need to confirm that the whole group is on the same page about that. Is the whole group on board for it to be like, this is D&D night, it's about playing D&D, it's part of the schedule, commit to it? Or is one of your players just like, oh, I just wanted to hang out and play games? And if I'm not feeling in the mood to hang out and play games, I'm not going to want to play D&D. You know what I mean? There are going to be, I've certainly had groups that a lot of the problems came from not everyone being on the same pages for that. And you can, and I will always be spouting this, is that it's fine. During your pre-session 0 stuff, when you're organizing who's going to be in a game, I think it is fine to say, hey, this game is going to be like a proper campaign. We're trying to tell a cool story here. Are you up for that? Or would you be more into a more casual game? Like, you can say no to this one and I'll invite you to the next one. You know what I mean? It's not the Met Gala. You don't have to say yes in order to get the invitation to the next one. I think as much as I love all the sort of safety tools and things that get discussed in session 0s now, I think that to a certain degree, session 0 has become about those things. And I think that a lot of it needs to just be that same page talk. Are we all on the same page about X, Y, Z? Because
safety tools have become this, friction point within the community. It's what gets focused on heavily. But yeah, there's much more that goes into a session 0. Check out our video on session 0s. It's from like 2 years ago. How wild is that? We've been doing this for so long. I know it has. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. It's been 2 years. It's been over 2 years. October was our 2-year anniversary. October was our 2-year anniversary? Yeah, I think 1st of October 2021 was our first episode. So there you go. We've been doing it for a while.
I was 25 when we started.
Michael did write into Ghostfire Gaming, a podcast at ghostfiregaming.com to ask, why no dragons in Grim Hollow? Do they follow the standard dragon rules of metallic equal good, chromatic equal evil? How can they if they don't exist? Checkmate. Good question. Checkmate. Ooh, you've got me there. Shawn Merwin, do dragons exist in Grim Hollow?
To a point, they do. Depends on your definition of a dragon. If you're talking about a dragon as a sort of species/subspecies, yes, there are dragons. They are generally very small. We might call them drakes. There are some very, very, very old undead dragons that existed back when dragons did exist in Etharis. But now they are not alive anymore and doing horrible things, or horrible things have been done to them. So the quick answer is there aren't dragons in the sense of we think of them in the normal fantasy setting, but they do have a history of in Etharis, and they may have a history that's hidden right now that we will see more of later. But I also want James to say what he was going to say.
Shawn, is it possible that one might even find one of these powerful undead dragons in a lair of some sort?
It is possible that might happen. Yes. And it is
some
possible
ridiculously high level.
Yes. And it is possible that, say, in the northern lands of Valaka, there is a specific dragon that has been worshipped even over the years, and that several of the clans of Valaka have ties to that dragon.
We think about these dragons a lot. We think about these dragons that don't exist anymore, maybe more than we should, even.
It's almost like it's always in our heads. It's like it's a job or something. I had the exact same question when I joined Ghostfire. I went to Jordan and I said, "Dragons?" And he said, "No, we don't have those." And it goes to the setting and what the setting's meant to be. The setting is meant to be grim fairy tales. It's meant to be sort of the monsters are the people. You don't need dragons breathing fire and raining hell down upon the people of the village when the local lord is that villain and is just as deadly, just more methodical about their death dealing and more what's legalistic about it, right? They're doing it in ways that people might just say, yeah, seems like a good guy.
They might not kill you, but they make you wish you were dead.
Exactly.
Dark fantasy. I'm a huge fan of the Blight Scale Dragon, which is kind of the one that's featured in Lairs of Etharis and the Monster Grimoire, and just the idea of this dragon that is not proud, its body is falling apart on it, it's losing scales and skin, it's crawled into a lair, it doesn't have a hoard anymore, it just wants to almost like it's shamed, it was once this beautiful regal thing, and then it's crawled into a space to just try and shut itself out from the world, and it almost has to be pried out of its lair or something like that. It's just spiteful and hateful towards the world, which is very there's something evocative about the Blight Scale Dragon that I really love. I just quickly answer the second part of the question in terms of metallic versus chromatic. I bemoaned this last week on the Lorecast. What draconic creatures exist in Grim Hollow certainly don't align to that chromatic metallic kind of lore of the Forgotten Realms, and it does frustrate me a little bit with how the Forgotten Realms dragon lore has become so ubiquitous about dragons kind of throughout fantasy. Because whenever I was playing in my homebrew before I was playing in Grim Hollow, I would describe a dragon, and the first question players would ask was, what color is it? To try and gauge what their reaction to it would be. I just find dragons more mystical when they don't have these clear definitions of, blue dragons behave this way.
So hard.
Well, to be fair, this isn't a Forgotten Realms problem. This is a first edition D&D problem.
Sure.
Right? Dragonlance has it, all that stuff.
What color was the dragon that St. George slew? I want to know.
I should know this answer, but I don't. My brain says red, green, maybe? I don't know anymore.
I think it's usually green in art. Fire-breathing green dragon. Chew on that one, D&D people.
The only dragons from mythology that I can think of where the color mattered were, of course, the white and red dragons who were fighting beneath the castle foundations in Arthurian mythology. And that legend, the colors are important because it represents the Welsh and the Bretons, basically. And so there's a symbolic element there, but it doesn't tell you about the dragon's physiology or personality or anything like that. So I don't feel beholden to color means X. Because I agree. When I make dragons in my game, I'm like, I give them names like, I don't know, the dragon of the desert skies. And it's like, is it blue? Yeah, it's blue. It's opalescent. It's got, glimmering star-like patches. You know what I mean? It's not about that for me. Yeah.
I agree completely. I many years ago when I was a teacher, I saw I was just asked to put on a movie for the class. I was a substitute teacher, and they were watching Spirited Away. And I got so inspired by Haku and how beautiful that animation is so incredible, that I became determined to find a Japanese dragon miniature that I could use to represent. And I found a fantastic one actually in the Malifaux range. I don't know if it's still being printed or not, but I painted it blue, and everybody assumed it was a blue dragon. I was like, "This is not a blue dragon. This is a wind dragon. This is a dragon of the sky. This is an elemental dragon." as opposed to like assigned by its color.
Because isn't that interesting as well? We've lost this kind of association of certainly Eastern dragons broadly, you know, often represent a river, or, you know, there's a natural, there's a connection to the natural world. It is the spirit of this place. Or, you know, metaphorical dragons, like I'm talking about the Welsh dragon, right? Like, I feel like in pursuing this this sort of D&D-esque chromatic dragon concept, we are losing dragons as a metaphor, and I think metaphors are powerful. Even Tiamat. Sorry, go on.
Well, there's a phrase in D&D, I don't know, scholarship, I guess, Gygaxian naturalism. And it's this instinct to, you know, in Dragon Magazine, write about monster ecologies, right? These are beings within an ecosystem. And a lot of people love it. And I think also there's a lot of good reason to say that it does a disservice to your fiction by literalizing the metaphorical. It's funny. I talk about this layer that I made at the beginning of the episode that literalizes the metaphorical, and I say it's such a great thing. It's a neutral thing. It's a stylistic. It's a tonal thing. And that's what I really like about Grim Hollow's dragons, right? Is that everything about Grim Hollow is that it is it's a world in a state of decay, right? There are things that were once enormous and magical and not necessarily good, but wondrous, and the world is blighted now compared to them. The gods are dead, civilizations have crumbled, and those things that still remain wondrous are opulent and decadent and evil, right? The vampires of Astoria maintain their splendor, but it is a deeply evil thing. And I love how the dragons, which now no longer really exist except in this decrepit undead form, those dragons which are left, the drakes, are these, you know, these crawling sort of animalistic things. And we get the naturalism there, but it has a broader symbolic meaning within the context of the setting.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean you can't bring a dragon into the setting for your home games, because that would be something that you've told the players forever, there are no dragons that you are familiar with. Oh, you hit 13th level, guess what? This town just said that a dragon attacked. What are you going to do about that?
Yeah.
Then it becomes something more.
That was something huge I tried to build up in my home campaign, was this idea that the only dragon that exists, I tell them this constantly, the only dragon that exists is Belagorn the Golden, who is the personal bodyguard of the Emperor, you know. And that's why there's an empire, is because no kingdom has ever been able to split apart from the empire, because the Emperor has a personal bodyguard that's lived for thousands of years or hundreds of years that is like a nuclear missile on the battlefield, you know. It just absolutely destroys conventional armies. Entire battles were won without a single casualty because Belagorn just landed, you know, and everybody was like, okay, you win. We're part of the empire now. Where do we sign up? And then you start you know, and that's just in the background. That's part of the background lore. That's got nothing to do with what they're doing, but that fact, you know, naturally just comes up every now and again. And then you say, a dragon is attacking. And this instantly becomes a cataclysm, you know, with massive implications, because, you know, if there is a second one of these creatures, then the power shifts within the empire entirely. And just the other point that I want to quickly come to is that, and this was advice I got from WebDM, from Jim Davis, I think, said this, was that, you know, if you want to stick with the metallic chromatic kind of thing, but you want to give them more mysticism, Belagorn isn't a golden dragon. Belagorn is the golden dragon. And there is a red dragon and there is a blue, you know, but they are singular. There is no reason for the color that they have. It's not tied to their morality. There's a word for this, I think,
that I like to use, because I talk about, I don't like to have Medusas. I like to have, this is Medusa. This is the singular one. I think the word is something like on Shaylin,
right.
That it means like this is like a singular thing.
Yeah.
And I love that. It's one of my favorite things to do when you say the red dragon. That makes such a massive difference to the tone of what that means. I just really like it. Because it feels like the opposite of the sort of taxonomical, right? It feels like the way that chromatic dragons have become the standard in D&D feels like it is taxonomy if taxonomy worked. Because in the real world, it doesn't, honestly. We keep trying.
No.
But, you look at paleontology as one of my favorite examples is like, oh, yes, the Brontosaurus. And then we found another Brontosaurus, but we're like, wait, the bones are different. That's actually an Apatosaurus. It's a different thing. And then they looked into it later and they're like, actually, we were wrong. It is the same thing. It's just an infant. And it's just like, we're just making it up. We're making it all up. Whereas these colored dragons, it's like, what if that was just true? What if this one factor of this creature told us everything about it and there was no room for gray areas? It was just true.
I mean, I want to speak of the one time where I think that, taxonomy, I'm not sure if I'm going to be using this word correctly, but that kind of like categorization of monster works really well. Yes, it's predictable, but Shawn brought it up first this episode, so I don't care. The Witcher.
The Witcher.
Because I think that it works in the Witcher world specifically because, and this is the way that this was described, I think, on a podcast I was listening to years ago, a video game podcast, saying Witchers are like they're kind of warrior monks. They're kind of super soldiers within the setting, but they're not super powered necessarily. They're mutants. But what they really are plumbers in a world where nobody else understands pipes whatsoever. And so monsters are relatively mundane to them, but to everyone else, they're these completely alien, mystical things. And someone will be like, the dead bodies in the graveyard started rising. And a knight will be like, they're not dead bodies, you fool, they're ghouls. And a witcher will be like, well, actually, they're ghouls because they have, these specific traits which make them dangerous in a different way. You're not going to be able to defeat them with that sword. I'm going to need to use this, and that's kind of the power fantasy of being a monster hunter, is that the differences and ways to exploit the weaknesses of certain monsters, but there's still a mysticism to it because there's still mystery to everybody else. And the way that I like to describe it is like back in ye olden times when we used to diagnose, mental maladies and illnesses and strange happenings as like, oh, there's a dragon over there, or they've been cursed by pixies, or this person is being haunted. The fun of the Witcher world or the monster hunting world is, no, they're being cursed by pixies and you got to go deal with that, or they're being haunted by a ghost and you got to go deal with that. And there's a mystery to unfold there. And as you get more information, you're able to tackle the problem in the specific. It could be pixies, or it could be a haunting, or it could be something entirely different. You've got to figure it out first using your expertise, and then diagnose the problem and then solve it.
Well, this is so interesting because I was going to say a very similar thing, but what you've just said reminds me of, I was just having a conversation with a doctor friend of mine where who were talking about is medicine an art or a science? And I was saying there has to be a different thing. And he said, well, actually, I think he said Plato called it dialectic because it's more like you're in conversation with what's going on, right? You've got the symptoms. It's like, okay, here's a bunch of symptoms. It could be any one of these things. So we have to try this and see how it responds. And then we'll reply and then it'll reply. You know what I mean? And I just find that so interesting and so it feels right. And it feels so applicable to this, right? Because what you're saying is exactly, I was going to say, it feels like alchemy, where it's like, it's kind of science. It's based in sciencey principles, but it's that unfolding mystery of, okay, we got to see what reacts with what. We got to keep responding with that back and forth. It feels like a materia medica, this sort of hedge witch style of medicine where it's like, we've noticed these plants tend to have this effect. Let's see what we can make out of that. And that I love.
That's so great for storytelling as well. It's played for a gag in the TV show, but in The Witcher, when he's fighting the Striga and it comes down the stairs and he wraps a chain around it and then it breaks out of the chain and he's like, oh,
forgive me, my lord. This happens all the time.
He tried a solution, it didn't quite work, and the stakes have risen. And the player, I love when players guess what the monster is and they're wrong because it gives you the opportunity, or they've just got a detail wrong. Or, recently I had a creature called the Gravekeeper who the players were told they have to slay the Gravekeeper. Because it's this source of terror within the town and it's a symbol of the Crimson Court's power and you must destroy it. And the party were like, all right, we'll lure it because it steals bodies, takes them to the graveyard and buries them. That's why it's called the Gravekeeper, because it keeps the grave. So they're like, all right, let's get a body, or I think they ended up casting the spell. I can't think of the name of it, but it makes you appear dead to all intents and purposes. Feign death. Yeah. So they cast that on one of themselves to lure it into a house, and they did that, and then they beat it to death in what was a pretty epic fight. And then I was like, and it crumbles to ashes and disappears. What they didn't know, because they didn't investigate, was that the Gravekeeper's power is tied to the grave itself, and like a lich, it reforms every time it's killed. They have to go to the graveyard to be able to unbind the curse that has created this creature. But when one of them, it has a fear effect that one of them failed against, so it kind of became the narrative that he's having a panic attack during the initial fight. And so it was his character who spotted the Gravekeeper again for the first time when it was revealed it wasn't slain. And he went back in, he failed the check again, went back into that, like, you know, almost shell-shock state of going back to the point where he was on his own. The other players were like, is he imagining this or is this real? And I'm like, well, I guess until somebody else sees
storytelling.
it.
That's some
so yeah, it's like raising the stakes.
I want to dig into the play element of this, because I think there is a reason why a lot of D&D monsters have become so rigid, and the game itself treats them fairly rigidly and predictably. And it's because over its now nearly 50-year history, people know what the iconic D&D monsters are. They know that trolls are weak to fire and acid. They know this stuff, and it becomes a point of friction between the knowledge of the players and the knowledge of their characters of how to deal with these creatures that are so iconic to people within the hobby. Which, interestingly enough, is why books like Monster Grimoire and is like Kobold Press's Tome of Beasts and stuff like that are so popular, because they break the mold. And so to change it up is a very difficult little thing to do. You can make new monsters and kind of hope they become iconic, but you know, the iconoclasticness of them is there for a reason, right? They're memorable. They have some sort of heritage to them. And so if you change any of that, if you make, and this gold dragon is evil, there's people who are going to get mad at it, right? This troll is weak to radiant damage, not acid. And it's like, people are going to feel like you're trying to trick them. You're trying to give one over on them. Not that you're trying to provide a legitimate challenge, but like you're playing with their expectations in a way that feels like a gimmick.
Well, I do think it's interesting, though, because I think that what you're saying is true, but I think it's true for Wizards of the Coast, who are publishing, because we've talked about before, they're the lingua franca of this hobby, right?
Yeah.
But it's like poetry again. Poetry is taking these expectations of language and how it works and changing it in certain places, or choosing where you follow it, where you go against it. And it has such an impact with genre, right? Genre, you have the horizon of expectations within a certain genre. And if you shift it slightly, it has a massive impact. And so I always advocate for choosing where you're going to go against those things. Because if you do it all the time, it just becomes a mess of things to remember. If you do it just once, then it has an impact.
I'm not sure I totally agree with that. I think you're right. Wizards of the Coast has a brand to care about. That's absolutely true. But as a DM, if you're going to change something for the sake of surprising your players, I have seen players get upset that you are trying to pull one over on them, that you are being unfair, that you've changed the rules of the game in a way that is, you know, that breaks the social contract of playing D&D, where puzzles have solutions.
I agree, except in that I think that has an expectation of what kind of a puzzle it is, right? It's like, yeah, a riddle has an answer. But is this a riddle, or is this something that, like Ben was suggesting, you have to put in some legwork? You have to investigate some things first. You know, if you just assume this troll is going to be weak to fire, and you go in with your meta knowledge of what trolls are, and you don't put in any effort into buying into that story and investigating these troll attacks, then maybe that one's on you. Maybe you would have found by little hints that actually this troll is weak to.
And it comes down to then knowing your players and knowing what they expect and what they want. There's the old saying, write what you know if you're writing a story, and that's horrible advice, because if you write what you know, you never learn anything. So write from what you know to what you don't know. Write towards something where you're learning. And if you have players that are like that, you're fine. And if you don't have players like that, there are still ways to do that. What you do is you drop clues. Oh, the trolls attacked. They raided the village and they ran. There are burn marks everywhere, but there are no troll bodies.
Sure.
Hopefully, if players are paying attention, they will then say, let's make some checks, let's do some research. If they ignore it completely and they just rush off with their torches to the troll cave, and suddenly the fire is not stopping the regeneration of the trolls, that's on them, right? Yeah. That's on them, because you've done your job as the game master. You gave them the clue they needed. As long as you spoke clearly and were making eye contact with someone while you said it, then they should.
You didn't whisper it behind your hand.
Right. They should be. They should be picking up on those things. Yeah.
And I also think, I mean, like James said, if you're doing it just for a reason, just for no reason, if you're just doing it to surprise your players, then that's going to be a problem. But if you're dropping these hints and they just don't realize that actually this was to let you know that the trolls were the henchmen of this evil wizard who's been giving them resistance to fire, whatever thing. If you fold it in for a purpose, then I think that it can be really, really fun.
Sure. I mean, I always love them juicy Monster Hunter, clues, as I call them. Which
you built a whole subclass around it.
I built a whole
class around it.
Yeah, Monster Hunter, still currently in playtest. Check out our YouTube channel and our blog, which we have plans for in the future, definitely. I think the other way that you can adjust this is at the point where your players, because I have this with Silver a lot, whenever I mention there might be a werewolf or a vampire or an undead creature of any capacity, players are like, oh, Silver. And I'm really not a huge fan of one problem finishes everything. I've been playing with this idea of like blessed weapons. What if you had to go to the church, or maybe the cleric in the party can bless a weapon and it becomes sacred and therefore capable of harming undead creatures. Yeah. But if you kill a humanoid with it, or you hit a humanoid with it, it loses its blessing and needs to be blessed again. So you have different tools for different jobs, much like a Witcher has 2 different swords for 2 different purposes.
Or like a golfer has many different irons for different kinds of hitting the ball, I guess.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, you see literally in the TV show, Geralt carries his swords around, not on his back, but in this big case that almost looks like a golf carton, or if that's the word, a golf wagon thing on... Shawn, what's the word for a golf thing?
A golf bag? A golf cart?
Yeah, there we go. Golf cart. There we go. He carries them, his swords in one of them instead. But when my players instantly go, when they say out loud to each other, oh, there's undead, we should get some silver. There's werewolves, we should get some silver. There's trolls, all right, I'm going to go get some alchemist fire. Then I will instantly ask them to make an investigation check, maybe a history check, some sort of check that allows them to know in character whether this instinct is correct or not, And obviously if they roll a 3 and I'm like, oh, you think fire will work? They'll all go, maybe we double check the fire thing.
And it would be great if a monster book had those checks for you right in the monster descriptions, telling you exactly what you need to know.
I mean, those are in the Grim Hollow Monster Grimoire. And if you just want a taster if you want a taster of 75 plus monsters from that grimoire, you can also get all that lore from Lairs of Etharis, available now on D&D Beyond.
We've been killing it with the tie-ins today. Good pat on the back, everyone.
I'm not going to lie, I kind of cultivated these questions. Speaking of Ghostfire publishing things, our Enchanting Emporium's Kickstarter is also currently live. I have no idea what we've reached because we're recording this a week in advance, but if you have backed it so far, thank you so much. We've got some amazing contributors on it, including the Dungeon Dudes, who we've mentioned already this episode, are contributing a merchant, Aldor the Immense, who's already been unlocked. That was a stretch goal. So is Jacob Buds from XP to level 3. Sir Nominus from the Questonomicon is going to show up as a merchant. That has been unlocked. At time of recording, we still have a merchant locked, which is from Crooked Moon, from Legend of Eventris. It's the Vagrant, a wandering or a traveling trader. So if that hasn't been unlocked yet, go back to Kickstarter, unlock it. Other great contributors on there.
Notice the Vagrant, not a Vagrant, on Shaylin.
There are no other Vagrants. And of course, Blackbird. There's great traveling trader Blackbird from James Hake. Or if you want more Grim Hollow clues and mysteries to unlock, Professor Terence Myron von Kufen, the exiled professor, which I wrote, is also included in there. James, do you want to add anything else to that? I feel like I'm stealing everybody else's thunder this week.
No, you're doing great, Ben. Enchanting Emporiums. It is, like I said last week, it's fun for the whole family. It's fun for your GMs who want NPCs and plot hooks and locations to hang your adventures around. It's great for players who want to get those magic items and who want to delve into the secrets of magic in their world. And it's just a perfect book. It's got no flaws. It is the number one RPG book in all the realms. You should get it for every person you know, even the people who don't play D&D. Yes.
Perfect. We will be back next week. We are streaming again next week at 10 a.m. Tuesday, Australian Eastern Standard Time. Started with the Tuesdays with the Australians this time. But that will be 6 p.m. Monday, Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. Pacific Monday Standard Time, where you can catch us live. If you want to come hang out in the chat, you can ask us questions. If you want to, I've never said this before, but it really is true. Because people have asked us this from time to time, if you do want to support this podcast, honestly, supporting anything that Ghostfire is doing does that. If you want to check out Lairs on D&D Beyond, or if you want to go check out Enchanting Emporiums, it really does help support this podcast. Especially if you click through the links down below. But otherwise, you don't have to. You can also subscribe, just tell a friend, get your mum to listen to it, get all your school friends in on the Lorecast, go to work and talk about the Lorecast. Smash that like button. Sorry, my bad. Or leave a comment. Those are good too. I always waffle at this bit anyway. My name's been Ben Byrne, here with Shawn Merwin, James Hake, Dael Kingsmill. Lairs of Etharis is on D&D Beyond. I can't state it enough, and we will catch you all next week for another episode of the Eldritch Lorecast.
I'm sure I used to try to make it sound like the outro music.
No longer. No, we gave up.
We've evolved
also,
to a higher state.
Exactly.
Dael, you are absolutely 100% doing the intro for this episode.
Oh,